Welcome to the Exhaust Notes podcast.
And I am on mute.
Hot start.
What is good, everyone? Welcome
in.
to the Exhaust Notes podcast. Impromptu recording, not in my normal location, so the intro tonight is going to be a little sticky, a little fun, but we're here. I'm with my guys, Todd and Rohit. Mid-season review, some crazy hot takes from the Discord community. It's going to be a fun one. How you guys doing?
I'm going to do my impression of you for the first 10 seconds of the podcast, which is... Sorry, guys. I, too, was on mute. What are the chances? But anyway, I'm doing great. Todd, how are you?
Living the dream.
Excellent. Halfway here in what feels probably the most parody-driven season we've had in a little bit, right? In spite of the fact that Max is still kind of running away with this.
Yeah, it feels like that. Like, the fact that we're already halfway through is a little mind-blowing because when we started this podcast and right before the season, it felt like we had so many races and it was going to be such a long season and so much action and, you know, the development race and all that stuff. It felt like we had so much ahead of us and it feels like it's flown by. Absolutely. Like just burning through the season.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we all kind of had the how many races do we really need in a season thought in the last couple of years at some point. And this year it's kind of like keep them coming, you know, like it doesn't feel like it's too much right now. I can't seem to get enough of it. Maybe it's because I get to talk to you guys every week after the race, but you know, it's been awesome so far, I think.
You're too kind to us, Nick, but yeah, I am definitely going through the Tyrone Biggums phase of let me tell you something you might not know about me, Joe Rogan. I like Formula One races. I like them a lot. So it's definitely been fun. Before we get into what I think we're kind of calling our halfway season awards, you guys want to do a traditional thing, but with a new twist? Since we didn't have a race, I figured from our standing section, we can just quickly go over both the drivers and the constructors series and see where we are before we get into the takes and get into the madness that is our show.
I like
Sounds
it.
Good.
Let's run it.
Excellent. Up first, we have the golden boy himself, Max Verstappen for Red Bull Racing. Number 2 is Charles Leclerc for Ferrari. 3, Sergio Perez, also of Red Bull Racing. 4, this is not a pattern, but it is a pattern, Carlos Sainz for Ferrari. 5, George Russell, followed by his teammate Lewis Hamilton in 6th. Lando Norris in 7th. The first probably big surprise for the standings, Esteban Ocon in 8th. Valtteri Bottas, a.k.a. Terry Botas, in 9th, and Fernando Alonso closing out the top 10. From there on out, we go into the non-point standings, if you will. We've got Kevin Magnussen in 11th. Daniel Ricciardo having probably one of the more frustrating seasons of his career, still in a respectable 12th, followed by Pierre Gasly in 13th. 14th is Seb Vettel. 15th is his protege, Mick Schumacher. 16th is American and Japanese sweetheart Yuki Tsunoda, followed by my arch nemesis, Zhou Guanyu. And then we have the Canadian portion of the festivities with Alexander Albon, Lance Stroll, and Nicholas Latifi in 18th, 19th, and 20th. And then Mr. Irrelevant himself, Nico Hulkenberg, I believe only had one race, but he is there in 21st place out of 20 drivers. Those are your driver standings. And then from a constructor perspective, we've got Red Bull Racing in 1, Ferrari in 2, Mercedes in 3, McLaren in 4, Renault in 5. I'm sorry, Alpine. I went back to 2017 just for a second. 6 is the surprising Alfa Romeo. 7th is the equally surprising Haas Ferrari. Then AlphaTauri and probably the disappointment, followed by Aston Martin. And then last but not least, what feels like for almost half a decade, Williams Mercedes.
Some interesting tidbits in there.
No, I was hoping that Nick would turn his mic on and then we would just hear crickets in the background and that would kill the segment.
Wouldn't that be an amazing episode, though? At some point, we should do that. When there's just something that's so ridiculous that we can't even speak on it, just crickets. Just an hour of crickets.
That'd be great.
I mean, it's interesting to to me, like, I don't know. I didn't have the faith in Charles Leclerc going into the season, but I think that, you know,
Really?
I'll save it. I don't think I was like doubting him, but I had him as like maybe a 1-win, 2-win kind of a guy, and it turns out that he's kind of like probably the only thing that's going to give Max a run for his money, unless Lewis has some insane run here, which, you know, could happen, but
It could be Lewis, it could be George, it could be Checo. Hell, it could even be Sainz if the cards play right. But yeah, this has been one of those things. And before we, I guess, stray too far away from the topic, I was just going to poke and prod you a little bit more, Nick. What about Charles Leclerc did you not have faith in? Like, did you think that he would be a top 5 driver, or is even this a bit of a surprise to see where he was because your expectations were so low coming into the season?
no, I think I was thinking top 5, but I mean, just based on the past few years, I guess my faith in Ferrari was not very strong because they haven't really delivered the cars. They've had good drivers, but they haven't really delivered the cars in recent years.
It's fair. Alrighty, gentlemen, where do we want to start? Do we want to go into the hot take review, or do we go awards first? I kind of want to do the awards because I feel we're a little bit classier than we like to let people in on, but my goodness, when the hot takes are here, they're hot and heavy, and we really shine in terms of being the clown broadcasting show that we secretly know we are, but we embrace it nonetheless. And I think Todd is now doing his impression of Nick.
I can't believe that. This is just going to be the I'm on mute episode. Let's...
Leave it
what
in.
I was saying. I feel like we got a little crickets in there too, so it's pretty good. Let's do the awards,
Okay.
mid-season awards. Then we'll do community hot takes, and then we'll do our hot takes to wrap it up. Our additional
Sounds good.
whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we came up with a couple different awards that we wanted to, I guess, give out to the drivers and the constructors because we're at that halfway point. And for now, we just have 6 awards: the best driver, the best constructor, the biggest surprise, the biggest disappointment, our favorite moment, and then a sentimental favorite. So I think the best driver and the best constructor are pretty self-explanatory, so I won't go into them there. Biggest surprise and biggest disappointment: it can be a driver, it can be a rule change, it can be a constructor. Whatever brought the biggest random emotion of joy and then also the perpetual sadness, that's what that awards are for, or that's what those awards are for. Our favorite moment, I was trying to think of specifically a racing moment, but maybe it could be a moment of commentary. Maybe it could be a Gunter Steiner head in his hands moment. Who knows? Maybe it's your favorite Christian Horner put down. Whatever that is, I'll let my host kind of explain what they want to put there. And then sentimental favorite, similarly, like who's somebody that in Brokeback Mountain turns you wish you could quit but you can't. So I think I'm playing somebody's hand on this panel when I made that award, but we'll see when that person gets there. But up first, we'll go with the best driver. So Todd, if you're off mute, do you want to go ahead and lead us?
Sure. I am off mute. I'm going to start with best driver. To me, this is kind of a cop-out, but it's also the obvious and probably truest answer. It's been George Russell. The Mercedes started real bad, the porpoising, everything like that, and he's everybody calls him Mr. Consistency for a reason. Up until... what was it, Silverstone? He finished in the top 5 of every race and then right back to it in the next race. So it's got to be George Russell for me, best driver. Given that his, like, obviously we could say, you know, Max is an easy one to pick there as well, but he's taking what started out as a pretty dog of a car to pretty great heights and to be as high as he is in the Drivers' Championship, and a large reason why, you know, Mercedes is still, you know, I guess best of the rest or whatever. It's
place in a 2-person contest.
Yeah, I mean, if there is really only like Formula 1 and Formula 1.5, they're super outclassing the rest of Formula 1.5 this year. So
No, I was going to say this, in the one race that he did not finish in that top 5, he proved to be a top 5 human being because I believe he jumped out of his car to check on my favorite driver, Zhou Guanyu, and make sure he was okay after what was probably one of the more startling moments of the season. Nick, any thoughts on the George Russell call out or anything you want to add on top of that?
No, I think that's a solid pick, right? Because to your point, it's both the racing and the, looking out for his fellow competitors, right? That's kind of what you want in a race car driver, You want him to go out there and kick everyone's ass, but you also want him to make sure that he picks up after whatever dramatic scene unfolds on the track.
Yep, that's fair. All right, we'll use that segue to talk to Mr. Engvall. Nick, who's your best driver, rather, for this first half of the season?
I mean, I kind of have to go with Max because he's really driven way more mature than I ever expected him to this season. If you looked at what he did last year and how aggressive he was, and it's simultaneously what you love if you're a Max fan and what you hate if you're not a Max fan, is the way that he drives. But this season he's been very calculated, way more than I ever expected from him. And I think the only times that he's really not been in the front running, 2-3 cars is been the team's fault for giving him a failing engine of some sort.
I think that's a really good point because we're so used to Max being overly aggressive. And in this case, he has been that calculated, mature driver that you've called out. And it's when the robots gain that self-awareness and you just are like, holy crap, now we're really in for it. He has proven to be the epitome of consistency, even though we just talked about George Russell. There is something to be said that for what felt like the first 8 races, he either won the race or he was out of the race. And he's now toned that into basically being the best driver, and it's not even close on certain days because it doesn't feel like he's getting out of third gear. But I'm saying probably too nice of things of Max Verstappen. I'll give this up to probably the second biggest Max Verstappen hater in the group. Todd, what are your thoughts?
No, it's it's like I said. Nick nailed it with his reasons. Like, I don't think any of us or even Max fans expected him to drive as mature as he is this year. And I think I saw an article or YouTube video talking about how Max is driving differently against Leclerc than he did against Hamilton in years gone by.
Ooh.
And I thought that was really, really good call out, and maybe just a stamp of certification that we know what we're talking about, because we've been saying it, that we've seen Max mature this year and drive in a way that has a little bit of car preservation, a little bit of points preservation. He's not like, one of us is going to make it out of this corner anymore. So it's Nick's right in that you could easily put him as the best driver of the year. I mean, obviously he's still in first place, right? But as far as strategy and that second level mind that we've talked about before.
Nah, when the dude wants to race and not be a jerk, there's nobody better. And I hate saying that because I definitely am Team Lewis when it comes to those two. But kudos to you, Max Verstappen. I really want to see how you follow up this first half of the season with what should be a tremendous coronation, if you will, of his second championship. And lo and behold, I think when we were doing that Hot Takes episode, some of us have the gall to say, oh, there's going to be a championship hangover. He's so used to being the hunter. He's never been the hunted. But my God, that man makes it look easy if he's the hunted, so to speak. I guess I'll use this opportunity now to talk about my best driver. And I was going to go with Max, but Nick went with him, and that's the right call. So I'll go for his teammate, Checo Perez. I think what he's done, especially from a number 2 driver, has been fantastic. And we always expect the number 2 driver to be within the points, so to speak. But Checo really has proven to me that he has a good claim to be the second best driver on the grid. And it's not the usual Checo way, which is tire conservation, situational awareness. He's shown some really active driving. He's still kind of maintained that level of consistency and, dare I say, a stereotype of being a great defensive driver, because unfortunately I haven't had the same race experience as these two guys that I call my co-hosts have. But it seems that all the Latin infused drivers tend to be very good defensively, and I'm wondering if that's just a very astute and crude observation that I've made, or is there some sort of historical pedigree that goes with it? But that's a bit of a tangent. And my hope is Checo wins more than just the Valtteri Bottas, if you will, of like, there are going to be races where I hope that Red Bull let him race and let him give Max a show, because I think he's been that good this year. Guys, what are your thoughts on my Checo Perez call out there?
I think you nailed it. He's been by far the best number 2. And I'm saying that with the caveat that I guess George is technically a number 2 driver because he's against the GOAT, whatever. But it doesn't really feel like George's been a number 2 because he's been so consistent. So I'm scared that they won't let him race because they want to like secure Max's championship as early as possible. And I think if it comes to like car development and stuff, they're not going to listen to Checo's feedback as much as they would with Max. But I think as far as like Checo finding another gear, pun intended, that it's true. Like, he's always been just a really smart driver, really good on his tires, and good results have come from that. And now you're seeing him, really like attack, for lack of a better word. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, I think he's just been absolutely the best number 2, right? Like, if he wasn't racing, if he wasn't racing with Max, he's arguably number 1 on any other team. Maybe with the exception of Ferrari. Debatable where he lands on the Mercedes team if that was the case, but he's just been incredible. So I really do hope that they either I want to see it obviously go to the end of the year always, because that's what keeps it interesting. But I really hope that he's not kind of buried amongst the pack in order to secure Max's win.
No, I was just going to say this. He's the best number 2 driver in the world, and we're not even talking about Red Bull anymore. And if he is allowed to race, it's going to be an interesting season because, as we kind of alluded to earlier, it seems like a foregone formality that Max has got this wrapped up. But, what's not a foregone formality? The constructors race. And we'll use that as a segue to talk about who we think is the best constructor. So, Nick, why don't you start us off with who's really impressed you from that side of the garage, if you will?
I mean, it's hard to not say Ferrari. For me, Red Bull's the obvious answer because they're just dominating, but Ferrari, in my opinion, has been more consistent with dealing with porpoising, all that kind of stuff. It's just impressive. I mean, I think other than like the last 3 races out of the gates, they were just massively impressive to me.
While Todd and I figure out who's going to beat this staring contest in the face, I will kind of just say this. Ferrari does well in spite of themselves sometimes, and as much as I want to give them that plaudit of being a great driving team, the strategy has just befuddled me, much like it has Charles Leclerc. And I will say this, I know I sound like a broken record. I think because of the fact that Carlos Sainz knows when to let his driving do the talking and not the Ferrari strategy, they could have been in a far worse spot. So I want to give it to them, but I think they're probably my second favorite, or not second favorite. They're probably in second place for the best constructors that I want to say, because I think I need a little bit more consistency from the man side of the garage, not the machine, which is saying something because that car has been wildly erratic at times.
Yeah, I was more so trying to collect my thoughts because Ferrari has just absolutely bumblefucked the strategy in so many races this year. And on top of that, they build a super fast car, but it's a fragile car. And like the two things you have to be like that you would expect from a constructor is good strategy and a reliable car, and they're neither. So that was surprising. Like the only reason Ferrari's in the fight is because of their drivers, and it's not the garage. So I would hard disagree with Nick there, but it's a hot take, and that's I guess the theme of this episode. We could just write that down for later as a hot take.
No, I've got it in the old Excel spreadsheet up here, but I will say this about them. Much like pick your favorite American sports league, there's always this historical power that people want to come back to their golden era, and we experienced that with Ferrari in this sport. But there are times this season where I'm like, I think they're going to figure this out. And then it turns into, oh, you should pit right now. And you need the Carlos Sainzes of the world to be like, no, I'm good. Like, don't talk to me. I'm going to keep driving. And the way I almost describe it is, it's if Kimi was a nice guy. And he's like, it's fine, I'll go. Because imagine Kimi being on this iteration of a Ferrari team where you have the possibility of winning every race you set your foot on, but then at the same time, your worst enemy are the guys that are supposed to look out for you. And that's one thing I wish I could just hand put Kimi in one of these races with this strategic crew and this car and just kind of see what the results may be.
I don't know why that just made me think of this, but there's a really famous clip of when Kimi was on Ferrari, and I think it was like 2017, 2018 maybe, and they're pushing him on the like rolling jacks to the start line, and he doesn't have his steering wheel or gloves or anything, and he's like screaming over the radio, like, gloves, I need gloves. And that is like the epitome of what Ferrari is to me. Like, they're really good at getting the car to the grid fast, but they forget the steering wheel and the gloves.
I was just going to say this.
If you have Tesla's self-driving experience to get you around the track, I mean, look, I understand where you're coming from because it has been a shit show over there in terms of strategy. But if your strategy is just go faster than everyone else and not have to worry about it, then they've got that part almost figured out. And I think they have fewer DNFs than Red Bull does.
Ooh, that's a really good question. I wonder who has the most DNFs this season.
I will check that out while you two continue.
I would actually think I would think it's Ferrari because not necessarily from the team's fault, but didn't Sainz DNF in one race because he went off, got stuck.
Yep.
Sainz has had two. Sorry, go ahead, bro.
No, I'm sorry. I was the rude one, but I'll just go ahead and say this. I'm looking through our season notes right now. Checo has 3 DNFs. Max has 2. From the Ferrari side, Carlos has 4, and Charles has 2. So I believe Red Bull has 1 less, if my math is correct. But like I said, I may be the worst Indian when it comes to math.
Yeah, it looks right. But I mean, that's my point, though, right? Like, we talk about them as if they're just like, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I love the idea of them just being the straight up pit crew from the Cars animated film, right? Like, that's the way I hear them in my mind and see them. The like, you know,
Tony Shalhoub's
lovingly racist American in me, you know, thinks of it that way. But like, if they've got a car fast enough where like they're, you know, also like, you know, the porpoising thing is a really interesting conversation, right? Like, I don't want to get too far into that because I want to bring it up a little bit later in this conversation. But there's something to be said about the lack of porpoising from the Ferraris, in my opinion.
I think that's fair. Todd, any closing thoughts before we go to you with what you feel is the best constructor halfway through this season?
Yeah, I'll just say that, like, if there was ever a statement to live by for a team, it was said by Enzo Ferrari a very long time ago. And he said, downforce is for people that can't build engines, which feeds into just if your strategy is go faster than everyone else, then that's Ferrari living the Enzo statement still to this day. So, you know what? I stand behind you now, Nick. I've changed my standpoint. I'm going to go into my best constructor, and I'm just gonna sound like a Merc stan this whole episode because my best constructor is Mercedes for a couple of reasons. One, and Rohit has said this a million times on our pod, and I'm sorry for stealing your answer if I just did.
That's fine.
But they are just pure professionals all the time. They rarely make mistakes, minus that 96-hour pit stop from Monaco last year.
It happens.
Yeah.
They are pure class, rarely make mistakes. If there's things go wrong, it's generally driver error. And they started the year with a shit car, and they were like bouncing their drivers to death, and they stayed the course and appear to have not only fixed it but taken a step forward in their car. And I'll get to more hot takes later about that. But it's got to be Merc for me.
No, that was my answer as well. I was just going to say this. It's one of those things where you know what you're getting with them, and that's saying something in this particular season because the two top teams have had reliability issues. Let's just leave it at that. Merc has not had that in the same way. And yes, they're not reaching the same highs, but they are also not the basement dwellers. And if this is the off season that they've had in terms of being off and not on, I would think every team behind them, and even probably Ferrari, if they're being honest with themselves, would kill to have their worst season play out the way it's been playing out for Mercedes.
Well said.
Yeah, agreed.
I think Alpha would love to be in their spot, right? Built a quick car. That's like a good comparison to like Merc, how it started, how bad they started. Same thing with Alpha.
Yep. No, I mean, and one last thing, because I think this speaks to how professional they are. We can't wax poetic about their ineptitude the way we just did for Ferrari, where Ferrari's whole tenet is, do you want a fast car or do you want a reliable car? Because you can't have both. And that's what life is sometimes. All right, so I guess it's up to me now, and I would say this. It should be Red Bull because they are leading the points, but I am always going to use an opportunity to push them further down in the mud. I'll say that the best constructor for me is probably Alpine, and it's one of those teams that are on the come up. No, listen, I can do the Red Bull thing. It's a great answer. Max is just running shit. Checo Perez is the best number 2 driver in the world. Christian Horner's going to say snide things that are going to make us laugh if we're being honest with ourselves. Dr. Helmut Marko is probably feeding on a baby somewhere, and we don't know what's happening other than they're just going to win almost every race that they have. That being said, I'll go off the beaten path. We did not expect this from Alpine. I'm the big Alpine fanboy of the group, so to speak, because, Mr. Ocon. But at the same time, Fernando Alonso is looking like prime Fernando Alonso, and I don't think any of us thought that was quote-unquote El Plan. Like, we thought he would be a nice person to keep things interesting, almost in the Kimi vein, so to speak, but he's been competing for races. He pulled the best Dikembe Mutombo impression I've seen since that Geico commercial, so yeah, that's why I like Alpine. I think they're doing really well for where they were expected to be and how they've closed out this half of the season.
Agreed.
But their car falls apart all the time. I saw a really interesting video the race put out a couple of days ago, I think. But Fernando would be, where is he currently in the standings?
10th.
He's 10th, right? On 29 points. They did a rough estimation if he hadn't had mechanical issues in races, and he would currently be in 7th or closer to 6th-ish, depending on their estimation. But he'd be something like 80, 90 points right behind Lewis if he didn't have mechanical issues. And that alone, I can't co-sign the Alpine thing, because it's been fair. Water pump failures, MGUH failures, MGUK failures. Just like, it's always the fuel pump failures. It's always something. Even so,
And I get all that, Tom, but what I'm saying is this, right? The way we've just talked about Alpine is how we were chatting about Red Bull at the first half of the year, how we've talked about Ferrari for the second half, where their mechanical issues are preventing this really great car to truly achieve its potential. But what's different is the fact that we expected Red Bull to run away with this. We expected Ferrari to pose somewhat of a speedy road bump for Red Bull on the way to their championship. Alpine at the start of the season was a little old lady that was waving to the race car driver from the stands. Like, there were no expectations. And they have in my mind, a good shout to being the fourth best team, which is saying something, because that's taking it back to the Renault era of Cyril Abiteboul. And I didn't think we would get there. But that's why I'm saying, like, I'm rewarding the potential given how low the bar was.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit, because
Do it, Nick.
According to mostlyf1.com, Alpine only has 3 DNFs, which, you know, we're talking about Red Bull and Ferrari having 5 and 6 respectively. You've got Haas, you've got Williams with 5, AlphaTauri with 4. Like, honestly, like, it's. I mean, the cars aren't fast, but they're not unreliable, are they? If they only have 3 DNFs?
So since they were able to finish, that does look better in a snapshot form, but they've had to, like, manage, right? They're like, oh, we're overheating, so you're going to have to manage, or you're leaking water, so you're going to have to manage, or the fuel pump's cutting out, so you're going to have to lift and coast, or whatever. So, like, he's lost points. Fernando specifically has lost points by having to manage an issue over the course of a race. So the fact that they didn't, like, spectacularly explode and roll down a hill in Austria like Ferrari did, I guess is better. But, like, the fact that they've lost something like 50 points ish by having to manage is equally as bad as having 5 or 6 DNFs to me. You know what I mean? Like, if we're gonna give Ferrari the credit for, like, you know what, just go fast. If he dies, he dies. Like Ivan Drago, kind of. Like, if we're gonna give Ferrari the credit there, we have to, like, be equally draw that same line for Alpine, right?
Yeah. No, and I totally get that. The one thing I will say, yeah, that is extremely well said. I will say, looking at the constructor standings right now, Alpine and McLaren are tied at 81 apiece. To your point, Todd, if they picked up one single solitary point from the 50 that they've lost, they're already at that 4th place, which is something I don't think any of us expected. So just food for thought. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I can't be fangirling over one constructor while I criticize the other. So fair enough. I will say that enough of the constructors. Oh, Todd, do you have something?
Yeah, I got one thing to add. I'm going to completely contradict myself later when we get to hot takes, by the way. I just want to call that out now. For everything I just said about Alpine. So,
okay, fair enough. That's what we call a tease in the industry. See, I've learned so much hanging out with Nick and Todd. Speaking of surprises, we'll go on next to the biggest surprise. And Nick, why don't you start us off with what you think the biggest surprise is for you personally this season?
You know, I don't know. I honestly, there's nothing that, like, stands out as, like, wow, that's crazy, that's happening this season. I think that probably the fact that Valtteri Bottas has put the Alpha car, you know, fairly high up the grid a couple of different times has been interesting, because I honestly expected him to go to Alpha and kind of fade away into retirement. But yeah, so I think that's probably my biggest surprise for the season.
That's the same thing. I mean, once again, somebody took my answer. It's been refreshing to see that tall drink of water. Actually, he's not even that tall. I would say he's probably a short and stout drink of water. Continue to live up to his prophecy of being a very competent driver. And I think if you had talked to all of us, what would we have said as the over-under in terms of points for him this upcoming season? Because I was famously stupid enough to say they're not going to score a single point between him or Zhou this season, and my goodness, did that blow up in my face.
I expected his consistency. I'll call back to my preseason prediction of him getting 2 at least P3s in quali, which I don't know if we're gonna get there, but we'll get to that. But I think it's a great call. Like he's where is he in the standings?
I believe he's 9th or 10th. Let me quickly glam that up. Yes, he's 9th right now with 46 points.
I feel like that's almost underachieving for Terry. If Alfa Romeo had a little bit more of a steady car, then I think he'd be even further up the grid there. But he like actually had on his day times where he would beat the greatest driver ever, at least statistically. Whatever, we're not gonna have the GOAT argument right now, but he had flashes of brilliance, even beating the best of the best. So, and you're going up against that for years on end, like, and he was always right there, right? Like he had several years where he finished P2 in the championship. So it's nothing to shake a stick at. Like he's a really, really good driver. So I think the fact that he's settled into the new team and taken over as team leader is awesome. And it's a really pleasant surprise, I guess, just to add on to Nick's.
We love you, Terry. We love that boat ass of yours because you're doing things none of us thought
got
were
that
possible.
cake.
That cake. My goodness. Jeez, that pound cake. I will use that to talk about my biggest surprise, which is if Valtteri Bottas is pound cake, then my biggest surprise is the rat that's cooking the pound cake through a human vessel, and that's Esteban Ocon. I don't think any of us expected him to be the number one driver on his team because, lo and behold, you still have Fernando the Bull Alonso as his compatriot there, but he has his own bit of consistency in terms of we've only seen one DNF. He seems to always be in the back half of the points, but it's also one of these things where we'll see moments where we're like, okay, this dude is not necessarily just there for the sake of being there. Like he is a competent race car driver. I think for me, it's very interesting to see him coming off of what I thought was probably his most memorable year for two different things. One was the fact that, yeah, he got the first place in the Hungarian Grand Prix, which is still a surprise as we kind of say that out loud. But then at the same time, he managed to do one race on one set of tires, which is still something I haven't seen. And I thought Alex Albon was going to do that this year, but lo and behold, Williams decided we need to change those tires up in the very last lap of that particular race that's now left my mind. But at the same time, I ride or die for Esteban Ocon. I know he's not the most exciting guy in the world, but you know what? Like Ratatouille, there's a certain soft spot that you get when you're watching him, and that's just him being a competent driver in spite of the adverse situations that he was put around in terms of the fact that he didn't necessarily come from money the same way a lot of these drivers do.
Is he the new Checo?
That would be a compliment.
Quiet consistency.
I don't think he's as dynamic as Checo, and I hate saying that, but I mean, Checo's gone from last to first. I don't think Ocon's got that in the bag, so to speak. Maybe not yet.
I don't think his ceiling is as high as Checo. Obviously, Checo's proved again that his ceiling is higher than I think anybody expected, but like he's the new quiet consistency that Checo used to be in his Force India days. Fair. I wouldn't say I'm going to take issue with one of the points you made. I wouldn't call him the number one driver.
Statistically, right now he is. We'll see.
But I think like development wise, they're gonna listen to Alonso more. Like team leader wise, I think it's Alonso. Racecraft wise, I think it's Alonso. Pace wise, I think it's Alonso. I think I just talked about, like Alonso has had a really bad stroke of luck this year, but your fandom of Ratatouille and his actions this year have started to turn me around on him, because I actually used to really just dislike him and thought of him in the same vein as
you bite your tongue. Don't you damn bring up that C word. The Canadians. No,
I'm not gonna go that far, but I wouldn't have put his talent much higher than Stroll's previously.
That's fair. I don't agree with it at all, but that's fair. This is why we live in this country, for having these opinions. Nick, save your boy from himself. Come on. And if you
I
say
mean, I don't
otherwise,
even
you're
know
dead
if
to
I
me.
can. I feel like Todd went from, well, it's not always. It's usually about the numbers, but now it is about the number. Well, it's kind of about the numbers, but not really about the numbers. No, I mean, it's a tough thing. That's the best. This conversation is what I love about this sport, right? Because people get emotionally invested into these drivers in ways that you can't possibly calculate. And you could look at statistics all day long and everything will be wrong the next race based on those statistics you looked at and the data that you based your analysis on. And I think this conversation is exactly that, right? Like Ocon's not necessarily like the biggest surprise to me, but I definitely was not quite as, I'm somewhere in the middle of the two of you in terms of like how much I appreciated the guy previously to this year.
Fair. Speaking of Nick Engvall appreciations, Nick, who was the biggest surprise for you?
The biggest surprise? I think I said Terry Botas.
Oh, sorry.
Todd's got to go,
you
right?
And Nick yeah, you and Todd are blending into one because I thought Todd also had picked Terry, but go ahead, Todd.
We're both generic looking white guys in baseball caps. We get it.
Thank you.
Biggest surprise to me, this is going to come out of left field. Zhou Guanyu.
I think you just did that to troll me because of how eloquently you pronounce that name, but go on, plead your case.
No, but I am, like, slight callback to your Alpine/Renault days, and you pronounce Cyril Abitable, like, correctly, and you just pulled that out of your hat and continue to struggle.
Was impressive.
Merci.
But anyway, and this is simply from the fact that I thought he was like at best midfield driver in Formula 2 with a couple of good days, a couple of good races here and there. And I guess maybe him having the stigma of coming into Formula 1 as a pay driver. I know they all are on some level. But I just didn't really have high hopes for him. So I thought... I think I actually said it at the beginning of the year that I thought I could see him off the grid in a year. If like, the money dried up or Alpha decided to go another way. But he is quietly improving race on race. He had a rough start to the year. He's had definitely his trials. But he's surprising me as far as his like racecraft, his pace, his awareness in the last few races. And he seems to be making like more than a competent backup to Terry. So I think not only will he be on the grid next year, I think he'll be even taking a step forward from there. And he's the only dude with actual like sneaker love on the grid. So shout out to him for that.
No, I was going to say Terry Botas needs a sidekick, and Joe Guanyu is the perfect guy to be that person.
You want to try it again?
Joe Guanyu? Joe? Is it Joe? Is it Joe? What are we doing?
Zhou Guanyu.
Joe Guanyu. He's French? Is he French? I thought he was Chinese, this fella.
Oh my God.
That's what we call a break, a laugh break. All right, we are at, I think, 40 minutes. Do we have time to get in depth for the last two awards, or should we just do one words? Because I do not want to dilute the hot takes, because that's why people are listening, are for the hot takes. So
yeah, we can speed through these. We got three more awards.
Perfect. So biggest disappointment, I'll just go ahead and continue to be the broken record I claim to be. Pierre Gasly, what's going on, man? Like, is it the fact that you're stuck in that car for another year that now you've entered the dark period in your life? I don't know, but we'll see how you rebound with the back half of the year, because at this rate, I don't think he's going to get another role for any other car on the grid.
I am going to co-sign Pierre Gasly. Biggest disappointment. Where the hell is he going? What the hell is he doing? I think it's partially the car, obviously, that the Altari eats a dog, but I mean, you're not even consistently outperforming your
teammate,
foul-mouthed teammate.
Japanese Cartman is what I heard somebody describe him as, and now that's all I can think of.
That is amazing. I'm going to take the biggest disappointment, kind of a U-turn here. I'm going to point at every engineer, race director, driver, car, everything about Formula One in this sport that they claim is the pinnacle of motorsports, and just say, what the fuck is porpoising? You guys can't figure out how to keep a car from doing this, and you have billions of dollars? This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of in my entire life as a motorsports fan, but I digress.
All right.
Can I change my answer to F1 TV direction?
Yeah, I was wondering, like, if there was ever
I was wondering about that.
I thought we were going with driver, but I had that thought when I saw the awards. I was like, well, F1 TV director, obviously. I'm going to change my answer.
No, I was going to say, we were watching My Cousin Vinny, and I didn't want to lead the witness, but I was kind of looking at Nick secretly and be like, is he not going to acknowledge this? Like, this is his brand. But speaking of my favorite moment, anytime I listen to some of our back catalog, for me, probably Carlos Sainz winning a race, because I always love it when a new driver wins for the very first time. You get to see the best of the sport. You get to see the sport celebrate that person. And then as a kind of second place to that 5-way battle for second place for those 3 laps was fantastic. Like, anything could have been possible, to borrow the Adidas tagline, and we would have been fine with it, because that was what we were expecting from these new racing protocols. So I'll say the British Grand Prix. Nick, what about you?
I'm going to go with the British Grand Prix, but I'm going to go specifically with the moment that Lewis kind of just rolled up and pulled off the unthinkable pass with Checo and was it Checo and Leclerc kind of going back and forth, and somehow they were like 3 wide into a corner, and then all of a sudden, like, there were 2 wide, but Lewis was in the back, and then out of the next corner, Lewis was in front of both those cars. It was just like, this is why this guy's considered the GOAT.
And through goes Hamilton. Also, the commentary was fantastic. Crofty nailed that.
Yeah, that was great.
Mine's a pretty simple one. Latifi in Q3. And I don't even mean that in a joking way. Like, the dude's had a rough go in Formula One. Obviously, he's outclassed. But, you know, even sometimes the bird that sleeps in gets the worm. So I'm glad before his career is over, which it's all but finalized, it sounds like. I'm glad he had, you know, his little moment in the sun. I genuinely am. He's like a super, super nice guy. Absolute smoke show of a girlfriend. He's going to go wipe his tears with, you know, $1,000 bills. So it's not like he's going on to a rough life. But I'm glad he had his little shining moment.
Can we do my starting 5 of our favorite Nicholas Latifi moments, Nick?
Yes, let's do it.
We need to do that at the end of the year. If in fact he's off the grid.
If he scores 1 point or if he's off the grid, that's what we're going to commit to right now. It can be for the Patreons. It can be just for the 3 of us. It's going to happen. And speaking of sentimental moments, yes. Nick, talk to me about a sentimental favorite who may not necessarily be a driver, a constructor, or a rule change, just something that's increased your love of a sport after what feels like the umpteenth year for you watching this game.
So I'm gonna wrap a lot of what Sebastian Vettel has done this year into this. I think off the track, he's been incredible. He's standing up for people, for other people, you know, in a way that you want to look up to your heroes and see them do. The same way that Lewis has for years, but Vettel is kind of taking things a step further and, like, you know, risking a lot of corporate backlash for some of his statements and t-shirt choices. But also, I think, like, just on a very, like, personal level, almost like I feel like he was literally just sitting back and watching Mick Schumacher go at Max Verstappen a couple weeks back, and, you know, to see him get so excited for Mick to get points, because honestly, like, you know, I'm pulling for Mick probably harder than anybody else, because I'd just love to see the Haas team get back to a point where they somehow, you know, started. But yeah, it's been cool to see Seb kind of come into his own with, because he was a young hothead just like every other driver on the grid for the first 5 or 6 years of his career, and, you know, now he's kind of like shifted to where like he's still a great driver, but he's, you know, doing so much more than just driving. Yep.
Now, I was going to say, if you ever want a lesson on how to be an elder statesman for your particular sport, why don't you just watch the Seb Vettel masterclass that he's put on this year? Because if it's not wearing the Miami Grand Prix first one underwater, or helping clean up after a race, or having a backbone and disagreeing with how some of the officiating has gone this year, like Seb Vettel's, I think, almost everyone's favorite number 2 driver now, and I don't think any of us would have it any other way.
Yeah, Nick stole mine.
Yeah, he stole mine too. Would you just want to name this the Seb Vettel Award and call it a day?
No, I'm gonna give. I just thought of this, and it's a weird take. So follow me here.
Sure.
Because it's an absolutely horrible situation, and the fact that Lewis even had to go through this again, but when the whole Nelson Piquet thing happened, but his clapback with that tweet. When some random person tweeted, imagine Lewis tweeting, who the fuck is Nelson Piquet? And then he just quote tweeted it and put imagine, is like the funniest clapback of it probably in F1 history. Like, there's been some funny ones. There's been some really, really funny moments, but that is like a hockey chirp times 10. It was amazing. It was like the best possible way for him to deal with that. Like, I know he had much more serious statements in the media, but for like his own personality and him like making light of it, but at the same time, like just absolutely like hammering home his point, it was amazing. So Lewis's quote tweet.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the man's put on a masterclass on how to be a global icon. As he's kind of, I wouldn't say he's at the Seb Vettel level, but I'd say he's probably 2 to 3 years away from that. And I'm wondering how more is he going to age gracefully, because he's doing a fantastic job. And just as a quick sentimental favorite for me, I'm going to take a bit of Nick's answer. Mick Schumacher. Didn't think I would care about a Haas driver, but I really want to see the guy do well. He just seems to go about it the right way. And I think there's probably so much immense pressure on this guy that none of us can ever really fathom. I mean, the closest thing I could think of is if Marcus Jordan or Jeffrey Jordan had made it to the actual NBA league and they were a competent bench player or rotational player, but he seems to be taking it all in stride. And I think he seemed to get a certain level of his flowers when he did get those points. And I don't think there was a dry eye in the house when that happened. So kudos to Mick Schumacher. Hope he can continue to build off that.
Got a tangent real quick.
Go for it.
And also shout out the Pad Hawk podcast that we were talking about in the pre-show, because their most recent episode was talking about how he is starting to channel his father's energy and have a little moments of playing the villain and like showing that fire. And I guess, I don't know if it was just going around the paddock or whatever, but Mick Schumacher's new nickname is Big Dick Mick, and I fucking love that. So there you go. You can put that on the spreadsheet.
I'm going to say that, to quote the immortal Shaquille O'Neal, put that on a t-shirt and sell it, Haas, because that will sell out so quickly. It would be
my God.
It would be the perfect companion piece to the Valtteri Bottas butt-ass naked photo.
It really would.
All right, gentlemen, enough of the pleasantries. Let's get to it. The reason why all 12 of our listeners are still hanging on. Hot takes.
Let's do it. So let's go through the community hot takes. I'll spout them out. You guys give me quick reactions to those.
Sure.
All right, Dalton, starting off. And speaking of Big Dick Mick, he thinks Mick is going to podium at least once this year. You guys' thoughts?
I like it. I'm with it.
I would love it.
I feel like
it's a hot take, but there's a sliver of hope there.
Listen, there's a hot take, and then there's just staring directly into the sun and speaking something into existence. I mean, Dalton shows solar violence today, and I'm here for it.
Just wait until we get to the next one. But I could see that happening. If he's having a good day and he's cruising around like P6, P7, and then we have some sort of, think like Silverstone moment where we've got 5 cars that are battling for P2 going into the same corner, we just have a catastrophic wreck, and because of that, Mick ends up on the podium. I could see it happening. I don't think it's too far of a stretch. All right. Moving on to absolutely let's explode the sun hot take. G-Duo Drew. Neither Max or Leclerc is going to win the Drivers' Championship this year. Do we need crickets? Yeah, there they are.
Yeah,
I love that. I love that take, but it does feel like even just acknowledging that I love it, I'm potentially risking myself for skin cancer.
If that happens, I'm renaming this podcast to the G-Duo Exhaust Notes Memorial Podcast. No way in hell happening. But I'll put our podcast title on the line if it happens.
But deep down, I'm kind of hoping for it.
Listen, we need sponsors.
Oh, God. I think we all are. I think we all are hoping for that just because it would be so wild. That would mean, like, Checo's in the running.
Signs,
the
Mercedes
Russell,
boys. Yep.
Yeah, like that would be crazy. But the sun is literally going to have to crash into the earth and destroy us all for one of those two to not win the Drivers' Championship.
Here's what's going to happen. If that happens, the sun is going to reenact that SpongeBob meme where he's just sitting on the couch and he's realizing, okay, this is my time. I'm just going to go off and walk into obscurity.
Yep.
How do you follow that up?
Well, we're going to follow it up with an equally hot take. Actually, a couple from our man Kazi, who I met on the Sneaker History Call this weekend. Cool dude.
Florida's finest.
And he says Danny Rick's going to have 5 top 5 finishes before the end of the year. Which I feel like the sun exploding is more of a chance of that happening than that happening.
If that happens, the moon also explodes. We're done. And I'll name my second born if I'm fortunate enough to have one Kazi, if that's the case.
Yeah. Nick, anything to add there?
I mean, I would love to see that. I think you and I both would love to see that.
I would cry ugly tears of joy if that happened.
Would you cry, I was going to say, would you cry ugly tears of joy if he won first place this year? Just one podium win. Or not podium win, but yeah.
Like one P1? Yeah. I would be like back on the DR hype train, like, oh, suck it. Just giving everybody the DX, suck it. Especially Trev. Yeah, it's
basically the visual of that is Todd literally has like bags packed, feet on the pedestal, ready to jump onto the DR train as it passes by at a gazillion miles an hour, knowing that there's no chance that it's going to be beneficial to him, but he's fully committed to it, which I love.
To be fair, I'm the only one on the hype train right now.
Yeah, I was going to say, if Todd wasn't a happily married, great father, I would say some very X-rated things about the trains that Todd would run in theory if Daniel Rick would do such the unimaginable, but I'm not that guy. So I will just say this. We would all be very happy, and we would not at all reference things like the human centipede.
Jesus Christ. All right, Kazi threw in another one, which I feel like is a little bit more closer in the atmosphere. I don't think it's going to happen, but I could see it happening. That's Hamilton won't podium this year. Or not. I think he meant to say win a race, because I'm pretty sure he's already got a couple of P3s. But it's very likely. It's not very likely. It's possible that he doesn't win a race this year. All right, moving on to our favorite Max Stan. It's Iron Trev. Alpine and Haas will finish 4th and 5th in the constructors. I actually think that's possible. He didn't specify an order, but I could I could see that.
Yeah, I think that's really actually pretty feasible the way things are headed as of right now.
Like more than a hot take, but kind of just likely.
I mean, it's a hot take in the sense that nobody would actually expect that. It'd be one of those things where we just casually watch the last half of the season and then go, what the fuck?
My wife cooked pasta today, and you know how the bubbles will slowly kind of boil? I think that's what that type of take it is. It's not a lukewarm take, but it's also not a scalding hot take. I respect the hustle iron, Trev.
He had a couple of other ones. Latifi's going to make Q2 again this year, which I think is easily possible. Like the dude got to Q3. Give him another little smaller moment in the sun. I think it's easy. And then Checo will win 2 more races, but I think that was more of a. It was in response to somebody else's hot take. That Checo's only going to win 2 more races this year. So, what do you guys think?
That makes me think.
I mean, I'd love to see Latifi. Honestly, I'd love to see either Williams driver, because I like Alex Albon a lot too. But like the team itself seems like such a mess. And then throw on the fact that Latifi is so hit or miss with his confidence that, you know. But like to Todd's point, like if he's going to be out of the sport, I'd love to see him, you know, make a little name for himself. Have that little extra line on the Wikipedia page, you know?
I'll do you one better. When he posts his availability on Cameo, much like we had the discussion of what was the guy's name? Nick Kloss. I don't want that for Nicholas Latifi. I want people to remember that he was a quality human being, a nice Canadian, as my co-host pointed out, has an absolute smoke show of a girlfriend. So I feel that's what you should be remembered for.
He's going to go wipe his tears with hundreds. All right. Moving on. Our honorary 4th member, AA Ron, came in with Russell's going to end up P3 in the Drivers' Championship. Which is like, sounds like a hot take, and then you're like, wait, shit, that could happen.
That's a lukewarm take. I would not bat an eyelid if that happened. I would wonder.
I mean, that's a hot take because it's coming from Aaron, who is a diehard Red Bull fan.
Yes, but he's only... So Russell's on 128, Carlos is in P4 on 133, and Sergio Perez is on 151. So he's not that far off. He needs to just outperform them. You know, they're in 2 cars that aren't the most reliable. They're both definitely going to take engine penalties. That's like... I could really see that happening.
I just want to hear from Aaron himself what he thinks will happen to Checo Perez for that to happen. Because if I look at that correctly, let's say Checo even chokes from 3rd or 2nd place, per Red Bull standings, I could see them saying, you know what, he's not good enough. Get somebody else in that 2nd seat, because what's going on?
That's a good point.
I think it'll be mechanical. I think if this happens, it'll be a mechanical issue, not a Checo issue.
Yeah, but still, do you think Red Bull would give him that benefit of the doubt? And they should. He's a fantastic driver. He was the best driver for me for this half season. But at the same time, there is a precedence there that Red Bull has set.
Oh, yeah. They'll give him the time. They just signed him to an extension through 2024. He's proven over the last year plus that he can be the absolute best possible teammate for Max in many situations. I don't think if there was a mechanical reason why he's DNFing because of mechanical reasons, and then the races that he's not, he's still competitive. The man just went from P20 to P2. Let's not forget that.
That's fair.
I don't think a string of bad mechanical luck is going to be like, well, maybe we should look at a junior driver. But at the same time, because of the mechanical issues, I could see that happening where George overtakes them.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to apologize ahead of time because I don't know this gentleman's name, but he is part of our Discord, and he has a screen name of SMJ1724. his hot take was Ocon will finish with more points than Lando.
Do I have a burner account? SMJ, I don't know who you are, but send me a private message, buddy. Like, you and I. We can be the Ocon Life Raft, or we can buy timeshares on Ocon Island. I'm so glad that there's another member of the Ocon Hive.
I mean, it's definitely possible at this point, the way McLaren has been kind of just like meh this season. I could see McLaren completely turning around and jumping up both for Lando and Danny Rick, but I could also see them just completely falling off. And I think, Ocon's been consistent.
By the way, I just got a text from SMJ 1738. No, it's 1724. I just wanted to reference the Fetty Wap song. We would like to be referred to as the Estebandits as our...
I was gonna say the Ratatouilles, as in there's two Esteban Ocons,
and then once it's three, we could put TOO. Like there's too many of us.
Oh shit. Okay. Hot take. I think there's no way in hell that happens. Lando's a far better driver. But let's moving on. Okay, this makes more sense now. So AJ came in with the hot take that Checo is going to win the driver's title, and I think that's why Trev responded with Checo's only going to win 2 more races. What do you guys think? Checo world champion?
I would love to see it.
I mean, I think that would be an amazing thing to see, but unfortunately, I don't want to wish that upon anyone above him on the grid right now, because the only way that's happening is something bad happens.
Yeah, like the sun explodes the earth.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah. There's no chance in hell. Sorry,
in which case, make sure you leave us a review before our podcast is annihilated by...
By the way, we joked about this. Todd, when your second is born, I will know that child's name and I will write a review for this podcast. That, guys.
Yes, we will. We're not releasing the name until delivery day. My family's very mad about that, but if Checo wins the driver's title, I will change her middle name to Checo or Chiquito or some female version of
Chiquita.
All
I know is I've got another member of the Estebandits.
That's really good. Okay, last but not least, I think we're like super on time, off time here.
That's fine.
We're not bad. Just over an hour. Okay, last Jackal came in with kind of a confirmation of an earlier prediction. Alpine's going to end up P4 in the constructors. Everybody's on the Alpine hype train tonight.
Listen, man, it is what it is. There's a reason why they're my best constructor.
Nick's Giants hat slowly transforming into a Kamoa hat. I can see it now.
I mean, I kind of do want one.
I'm surprised you don't have one, to be honest, because that seems like a very, not that you would like necessarily rock it, but it's just as far as classic hats in F1 go, that's a pretty classic one.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Sorry, go ahead, Ro.
No, I was just going to say, we have one last section, and it's hot takes, but these are aged hot takes, because this was, I think, our second or third episode when we made these predictions. So, Nick, why don't you lead us off with this hot take? Or go ahead.
Before we do that, there was one hidden one you missed from the Discord, which you can join by hitting the link in the description. But Dalton had one in one of his replies that said, I'll give one more. Max is going to win every race the rest of the season. What do you guys think?
That would be the darkest timeline. But it's
not going to happen. It's not going to happen simply for the fact that they're going to take multiple engine penalties, and as good as Max is, I don't think he's going to do, P20 to P1 twice.
So for the new fans of the sport, break down what that means in terms of taking an engine penalty in this example.
So there's like a limited number of parts that you can use for a season. Like you have a limited number of gearboxes, you have a limited number of engines, you have a limited number of turbos, et cetera, et cetera. If you take more than the limit allows, I think it's 3 internal combustion engines, you then take I believe it's a 10-place grid penalty the first time, and for some god known reason, you only take a 5-place grid penalty the second or subsequent times. And I can't remember where I saw the count. I did see it this week, but they're both the Red Bull and both the Ferrari drivers are already on 3 engines each, and we're halfway into the season. The way that those engines have been popping for both of those teams, I would at least think that they're going to double that number by the end of the season. So that means at least for 2 to 3 more races, he's going to be, regardless of if he's qualifying on pole or not, he's going to be starting from at least the middle to the back of the grid, depending on what else they have to take. So if going into this a little bit further, story time, if they take an engine and a control electronics or an engine and a gearbox, those penalties compound. So generally you'll see that if they're going to take an engine, they'll also take whatever else they need. So they are starting P20 no matter what.
So basically, all these hot takes are actually way more possible than we thought, and we need sunscreen.
Why'd it get really bright in here all of a sudden?
Oh, that's the future of the Exhaust Notes podcast. That's why we wear shades.
All right. Are we doing... So I noticed something in the spreadsheet. There's only 2 of my hot takes.
Yeah.
And I'm a jerk.
What was your missing hot take?
I don't remember. I'd have to go back and search. I'm sure it's either in our text thread or somewhere in a note in my phone, but I'd have to find it.
Okay.
Since we're up against time, do we want to just add the 2 new hot takes and then we'll review all of them at the end of the year?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. So, that being said, Rohit, give us your first additional hot take mid-season review.
My first hot pick in the hot pick draft, I will say Carlos Sainz will outscore his teammate in the back half of the season.
That's a spicy one. You must be part of the Chili fan club because that's Sainz's nickname.
That is really spicy. And speaking of spice, you can save 10% off your Kicks with V hot sauce.
You're welcome, V.
But seriously, code history 10 I think gets you 10% off, or sneaker history 10 gets you 10% off.
I love that. I do need to re-up.
I think that's it's not quite as spicy as one of Rohit's original hot takes that Red Bull will gain a 3rd team. But
we still haven't heard that Porsche announcement. I'm just saying.
Right? And like, honestly, like I feel like I missed an opportunity to throw in a Porsche comment around the biggest surprise or best constructor, because already getting Honda to basically take the pain away from being a constructor by convincing them to come on as a constructor temporarily for a couple of years, as we talked about in a previous episode, that could be constructor of the year even without even running a team, right? Like that's quite the power move.
It is. Speaking of power moves, Nick, what's your first hot take to add to your... I would say you're the most successful in terms of your takes actually coming to fruition.
So I think both Russell and Hamilton will get wins.
One each, or like give me an over-under?
I'd say over and under 3. Over under 3, but like 1 each for sure.
Well, Like, so over under cumulative total. So like,
So let me ask
you know, Russell gets 2, Hamilton gets 1 kind of thing.
Yep.
Wow.
Todd, your work is cut out. There have been some spicy takes.
Yeah, I thought I was gonna have. Okay, well, this actually feeds into what Nick just said. I've got a 2-part hot take here. Merc is gonna beat Ferrari in the constructors, and I'm gonna need those wins that Nick just talked about for that to happen.
I was gonna say, wasn't one of our many convoluted bets that already? Anyway, I guess because we never wrote it down, you're right. But Merc over Ferrari, so they've got second place locked up.
Yep, you heard it here first. They're currently like 70-ish points off of Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship. But as I stated several times now, Ferrari's going to have a lot of parts penalties over the course of the year. We just saw another catastrophic blow up in Austria. And I think because Russell's Mr. Consistency and Hamilton's finally coming around on the car, they've figured out the porpoising-ish. We still have yet to see a bumpy track for that to be tested completely. But they've also taken a step performance-wise. So I think it's going to be Red Bull running away with it and a fight for P2 with Merc and Ferrari. Merc coming out on top because of their German-like clockwork.
Can I say that? Sorry, one last thing around that prediction. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call a hedge, because one of Todd's first hot takes of the year was Ferrari's going to win the Constructors' title.
Yeah, well, we'll review that at the end of the season. If they could make a car last the whole race, they would have it locked up. So the second part of that is, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, but McLaren's going to be beaten by Alpine, Haas, and Alfa Romeo in the Constructors.
In that order?
So they're currently
I feel like I was just stabbed in the back by my fellow McLaren fan.
At 2, Yates? At 2?
I can't.
But also, you're right.
Okay, so here's my reasoning on that. They're currently tied with Alpine. They're technically ahead of them because of countback or whatever, but they're currently P4 in the Constructors. They're tied with Alpine with 81 points. Behind them is Alfa Romeo on 51 points and Haas on 34 points. Collectively, all of those drivers are on a better run. Lando is obviously still great, right? It's not going to be Lando's fault. It's going to be the team's fault, and it's going to be Danny Rick's fault. They've stated publicly that they're not bringing any major developments for the rest of the year. The car is what it is, essentially. All the other teams are still developing. How they're beating that in the cost cap era, I don't know, but they spent their money more wisely, or God knows what else. So they are going to fall behind all 3 of those teams and finish 7th in the Constructors. I don't know if in that specific order, but I actually would probably say it's Alpine, Haas, and then Alfa, because I think Haas has a higher peak than maybe Alfa does because of the Ferrari power. Well, they're both Ferrari powered. Haas seems to be dealing with the power unit stuff better than Alfa does, I guess. So there's my reasoning. That's my hot take.
I like it. You one-upped somebody else's Iron Trev's prediction, so I like the fact that your ongoing rivalry continues and it's getting spicier.
Yeah, our rivalry is now just who can talk the most shit about McLaren.
Yes. All right, well, Nick, what is your final new hot take?
All right. I'm going to say that either Sebastian Vettel or Fernando Alonso will score a podium.
And I will use that to say my final hot take, which is we will have 3 podium places from the non-top 6. So I'm one-upping your prediction.
Wait, roll back to Nick's for a second. Yours was that either Seb or Alonso is going to have a podium before the end of the year?
Yep.
Who do you think is more likely out of those two?
Oh, definitely Alonso. I feel like he's got a better car, and he's just way more aggressive right now. But I think that, deep down, I'd love to see Vettel get a podium out of the Aston Martin.
Yeah, that team's in shambles. I would also like to see Seb because I love him. I want to bro hug him.
I would ugly cry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He'd pop out of the cockpit at the end of the race, and like bees would just swarm, like instead of doves, it would just be bees.
I would say his Patronus are bees, but yeah, I can go with that. He can be Patronus.
And then yours was
so three.
We're gonna have
3 podium places from the non-top 6.
So essentially,
for 3 positions will be non-Ferrari, non-Red Bull, non-Merc.
Okay, so that would be like you're thinking Lando, and Alonso,
Ocon. I mean, I still think it's going to be a very top 3 heavy back half of the season, but I'll see 3 results where you will see non-top 6 people on the podium. Just 3.
Okay. That we would need some pretty chaotic races for that to happen, but anything's possible.
I do.
But that's why I asked you about the engine penalties, because that's a really interesting factor that's going to be thrown into the mix as this kind of plays out, right? You have Mercedes actually consistently kind of moving up and up and up and up. The top 2 teams are going to be taking penalties for sure. And then you have all these wild cards in the midfield.
Todd,
that's the crazy thing, though, is because I think Merc and Williams and McLaren are like the 3 best teams poised parts-wise. They're all Mercedes-powered. So that's definitely plays into the back half of this year. I know that I can't remember. I wish I could find that link again. But like, there's several of the midfield teams that have already taken engine penalties, and we're halfway through. So, and Renault being one of them. So it's going to be interesting.
It's really interesting to think about the fact that last year, I think we would all agree that basically Formula One, the FIA, Formula One as an organization mismanaged the season so poorly that we ended up, and maybe it's just Michael Masi and he's gone now, he's left the sport, but like, it's hard for me to believe that he was the only decision maker in that entire process. He's the fall guy, in my opinion. But it's really interesting to think that that group of people somehow, some way, came up with all these rule changes where I'm literally sitting here excited about the rest of the season, even with Max so far in front, even with Red Bull so dominant, because it just feels like something could happen the rest of the way. Like that, I feel like something crazy could happen at any moment and just throw this all into, a fresh start for many of these teams.
Definitely could happen. Yep. All right. Speaking of Michael Masi, it was confirmed that he was the fall guy because he left the FIA and has moved back home to Australia. Fun fact.
Yep.
So my last hot take, and this is not necessarily specifically about racing, but kind of goes along with what Nick just said about the excitement of the season and the continued upswing of Formula One worldwide. I think that we're going to have one new team confirmed to the grid for the 2024 season by the end of the year. And I'm saying that kind of before the next season starts. I think we'll have one new team to the added, so we're going to have at least 22 cars go on confirmed for the 2024 season by the end of the year.
Predictions for the drivers?
I think The weird
Danny
thing
Rick?
is, no, it's not going to be Danny Rick. For some reason, I'm just not thinking it's going to be Andretti. I just heard Andretti on another podcast talking about their struggles. Mario Andretti, not Michael Andretti. Mario Andretti was on a podcast talking about not necessarily their struggles, but just how it's been going. And there's been a bunch of stuff in the news, and they're kind of calling the old guard haters a little bit. So part of me somehow thinks it's going to be Audi. And this is, I don't know why I feel like this, but I think Audi's going to try to buy Aston Martin.
I'm going to add that to your hot take because that makes it spicy.
Lawrence Stroll is going to see that he bit off more than he could chew, and he wants to stop bankrolling his idiot son, who also has a smoke show girlfriend. Look her up. Holy hell. Sorry, I don't know. It's been a weird couple of weeks. I've been alone with a 4-year-old.
I just want your son to introduce Smoke Show to all his friends at daycare and school, and then just have him explain what that means.
Yeah, show and tell. This, Jesus Christ. Yeah, I think even though they've been saying that they're not currently taking applications for new teams, I think Liberty Media wants to capitalize on the upswing, get some new excitement, get some new regions in, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, I think it's going to be Audi for some reason over Andretti.
I mean, I guess like hopeful hot take for me would be that it's both and all of the above, like Porsche, Audi, Andretti.
Red Bull.
Let's just make
3.
this one big happy family.
I don't think Porsche, counts as a constructor though, because they're going to be the engine supplier to Red Bull. So like I was kind of excluding them. I think that's going to be announced. Well, it was supposed to be announced in Austria. For some reason, it wasn't. But I wasn't like including them in the mix there.
All right. Any more before we get out of here?
No, my hot take is you can follow me on Instagram at RohitM13 and on Twitter at Roheezy. Todd, how about you?
I am T-Easy on Instagram, TeasyF1 on Twitter. And also, shout out to Lewis Hamilton, who's going to hit 300 races this weekend in Le Castellet. And I had a trivia question for you guys, but we'll save that for the end of the show, I guess.
Ooh.
Well, you can find me at Nick Engvall on all platforms. You can follow the show, Exhaust Notes FM, on all platforms, or see all the previous episodes at exhaustnotes.fm. And related to the Lewis's 300th race, I'm going to say that he's going to win.
I agree. I think Lewis wins this weekend.
Carlos Simmons for me.
Okay. Pepper and spice and everything nice. There's only 5 drivers above 300 races in F1. Who are they?
Schumacher?
He's one. It's a pretty recent Red Bull driver.
Nick, this is a full circle moment. You went back on mute.
Is Alonso above 300?
Yep. Actually, he's going to be the number 1 all-time by the end of the year if he starts every race.
Nigel Mansell.
No. Think Calder. Nickname of the Iceman.
Ooh. Kimi Räikkönen.
Man, I was going to say Val Kilmer.
I haven't seen Top Gun yet, but that's a great reference.
Thank you. I try.
Okay, I'll give you guys some hints.
Who was the last one?
There's two more. Okay, Jensen Button, which actually surprised me.
Also on Cameo.
I should have known that.
Jensen Button, he actually was kind of a journeyman in F1. I always think of him at his time in Red Bull, but he raced for a lot of teams. And then the other ones you guys might not be familiar with, but he was in the league, as they say, for like 17 seasons. I want to say. Wow. Rubens Barrichello.
Oh yeah, he drove with Schumacher for years at Ferrari.
Yep, and
he was the original Checo.
Yeah, he drove for a million teams, and he was he was around forever. So
I should have known that too, because I was a big fan of Barr. Aaron was a big fan of Barr, Honda team, who Jensen Button and Rubens Barrichello both drove for. God, I'm slacking.
It's okay. Today was truly the Exhaust and the Exhaust Notes podcast. I feel like we went for 90 minutes of pure, unadulterated fun, and we're feeling it now.
One more fun fact.
It was a blast, though.
It was 90 minutes, but we're going to go a little bit longer, because if you're still listening, you're going to get all of it. Sebastian Vettel would finish on 300 races if he didn't miss the races at the beginning of the year with COVID. So if he does retire, he's going to retire at 299.
Which would be retire.
Such a bummer.
I will cry ugly tears if he retires.
Here's the thing. If that happens, I will start a Kickstarter for whatever Formula One driver decides that they got COVID the first race back from next year. So then Seb can jauntily march in and take that spot for 300.
That would be awesome.
I love it.
Okay. And we love you. Please leave us reviews, like our posts on the social media, listen to this, tell your friends about this, because at the end of the day, as much as we love cracking each other up with these hot takes, we also love cracking you up, unseen listener. And our thought is there's always somebody that's listening to this podcast for the very first time. So if that's you, we hope you like this, because if you sat through all of this, then you're truly one of our tribe, and we would love for you to stay with us and write us a review.
Well said. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.
Crickets.
Human centipede.